Good morning, vinyl community. Got my Nic Schreck book here. I'm going to read out a chapter called Why Rosteau Had to Die. In May of 1970, the media was captivated by every sensationalized detail of the horrifically enthralling Manson story. In a few months, the hotly anticipated trial was due to begin. Lost in the commotion was an obscure East Coast news item which only a few people knew was intimately related to the supposed ritual killings ordered by the hippie cult leader. Anyone looking for a connection to revolutionary occult slayings and hippie hocus pocus would surely have missed the report of small-time crook named Joel Rosteau, scheduled to go to trial in New York for so mundane an infraction as interstate theft of securities. It was feared by his partners in crime, and not only them, that he would talk, not just about the Kennedy Airport hijinks, but about his related knowledge of the circumstances leading to his good friend Jay Sebring's death. With the exception of Sebring's employee Charlene McCaffrey and Tex Watson himself, few knew better than Rosteau that the Cielo Drive slaughter had nothing to do with the speculative cult murders nonsense the papers were full of. The bullet wound in Rosteau's still hobbling foot was an ever-present reminder that Sebring had died during a bloodier and bigger budget Hollywood remake of precisely the same incompetent Tex Watson burglary bungling that he and Charlene had fallen prey to. Did Rosteau know who Watson was when he shot him on April 69? I still haven't been able to determine that. Few remembered Rosteau being connected to Cielo after media coverage shifted from the victim's rather ordinary criminal associates to their killer's once more colorful Charlie and his companions emerging as key suspects. The police, at least during the initial stage of the abruptly terminated investigation, were all on this frill fairly early in the game. During September 16, 1969, interrogation LAPD homicide investigators Batchelder and Lee already broached the subject to Rosteau. They asked the man they described as a businessman in his 30s about his girlfriend Charlene's recent claim that she had delivered narcotics to the Tate residence in the night of the homicide. According to the police report, Rosteau's informed McAfee that he had delivered cocaine and mescaline to the house, but that Furtowski and Sebring wanted some additional narcotics, that he had gone back down the hill but was unable to locate the other narcotics they had requested, and therefore he did not return to the Tate residence. Naturally, Rosteau obeyed the Omerta Code, which is what the mafia members take, allegiance to the Don. I think the FBI take the same Omerta Code to allegiance to the president or the secret society. He denied it. All he would reluctantly admit to was having some relations with Furtowski, who was safe to talk about since he was freelance dealer not formally allied with the mob. True to form, Rosteau denied knowing Sebring very well, even though he was dating his receptionist and was often seen at the hair salon. What the police didn't know at the time was that just where down the hill Rosteau had gone on August 8, 1969. Where did he go? To get LSD from Rosemary LaBianca. She had it in her refrigerator, allegedly. On the memorable evening, Sebring and Furtowski told their visitor Rosteau that they were expecting a big-ticket customer due to stop by Cielo Drive at midnight. And there were several other big-name clients awaiting their weekend chemicals who couldn't be disappointed. Though Jay stored a good amount of acid in the Polanski fridge for personal use, he really needed a large quantity of LSD that they had been counting on Rosteau to drop off. There was a lot of money at stake. Rosteau left them with cocaine and mescaline he preferred customers paid for and promised to be back with the acid. Two independent sources, one a prison confidant of Susan Atkins, and the other a former romantic partner, Ian Quarrier, claimed that they told them that Rosteau went to score from another acid wholesaler, Rosemary LaBianca. According to these slightly varying accounts, Rosemary didn't want to return to Cielo with the goods because she was out of town that night. Though this gap in the night's events was filled in by two different sources, rather without further confirmation, I have no longer feel confident stating that the fact that rather than possibility, both Atkins and Quarter were notorious in telling as many lies as the truth. I would disagree with Nic on this point that Susan told the truth except when Bugliosi forced her to lie. Manson continued associate Vern Plumley suggested a similar scenario without naming a specific dealer as middleman between Cielo and Waverly. Jane Fonda was privately told much of the same story directly after the murder of her lover Jay Sebring and her friend Tate. Furthermore, since the 2011 edition of this book, I have obtained reliable confirmation that it was only Rostow who delivered to Sebring that night. At least three other dealers also dropped by. Sharon Tate's friend Ian Quarrier, Fatowski's contacts and eminently suspicious Ed Durston, and Harvey Dareff, Diane Linkletter's lover and dope dealer. They were the copious supply of MDA pills delivered to Cielo, most likely by Harrigan. That's like Papa Doyle, Billy Doyle, Harrigan, and Donovan. The days before the murders not only makes sorting out who sold what to whom even more confusing. After the retail client whose acid order Sebring needed to fill in a few hours, well, that was none other than Charles Watson. Just how damaging would Rostow's confession have been in the Helter Skelter cover story? What would it have revealed? Rostow was not only keenly aware that Sebring and Fatowski were in the middle of conducting a dope deal for their murderer on Cielo Drive, as one of the three supervisors of the Los Angeles franchise of the mob's Kennedy Airport super scam operation. Rostow was under constant surveillance by several government agencies in '69. So were his many high-powered Hollywood business associates. One of the suspicions the authorities harbored was that since 1966, millions of dollars of proceeds from the Kennedy Airport racket were being laundered into film production, especially at Paramount Studios. The mob and the cocaine dealer connections of the Paramount vice president in charge of production, Robert Evans, made him a likely suspect as a receptionist of the pilfered funds funneled into L.A. by Rostow. While nothing concrete came of these suspicions in '69, we will see that certain anomalies, even Evans' later career, are more than suggestive of the continuance of an early pattern. Evans was willing to go some length to conceal that there was something more about the killings of his friends Sebring and Tate than drugs. That was also emerged as we plumb into the underworld's Stygian depths. Many of the associates may have breathed a sigh of relief when Rostow refused to reveal what he knew during his early chat with the cops in September. Now that Tate LaBianca cover-up was about to go full blast in the court, although Rostow and his other drug dealers in the Sebring-Fatowski circle were identified in the newspapers, an ordinary hoodlum just wasn't as exciting as all the false speculation about the black magic, hypnosis, and other horror fiction fare. Some reporters did responsibly cover this surprising number of crooks and hustlers mingling with the beautiful people, but such everyday iniquity never really gripped the public imagination the way the diabolical nomadic tribe of ex-sex hippies from hell did. For some of the old reasons that the conspicuous drug users from the Spawn commune were named as suspects in the crime, all talk of a drug dealer motive for the murders suddenly ceased in favor of a more fanciful spook story. In the May of 1970, had Rostow crumbled under pressure of the serious prison time he had faced, would now made a deal with some of the other branches of the judiciary. He could have easily exposed Bugliosi's eminent case for what it was. Before that could happen, some unknown party who would rather before have been safe than sorry say to it that Rostow had been beaten to death and deposited in the trunk of his rented Cadillac. The car and its grisly passenger were parked with the poetic symbolism that surely made it its point at Kennedy Airport, the scene of Rostow's most profitable crime. To this credit, Ed Sanders, who is married to Lynette Frome, was on Rostow's trail in the early 1970s when he reached the first major book in the Manson case, The Family. In a rather remarkably revealing passage in the book that has been strangely neglected, Sanders noted that the several businesses of friends of Jay Sebring have been murdered. I was trying to locate one of them, a man named Rosteau. This is Ed Sanders talking, for whom I wanted some information when news came in from the fall of 1970 that he had been found dead in a car trunk in New York. Another associate was found murdered in Florida around Christmas time in 1970. These events have caused me to swerve my investigation to safer areas. No book with worse permanent meditation text next to a tire. We can be sure that Sanders wasn't the only one at the time to divert his investigation away from the deadly organized crime drug dealing networks that were a true crux of the Tex Watson slaughter spree. If only Sanders was bolder in pursuing the Rostow lead he received from defense attorney Paul Fitzgerald in 1970, instead of opting for the safer because untrue fantasies about cult sex societies he opted for instead. We might have to be spared the lie of helter-skelter decades ago. In 2013, Charlie uttered this cryptic remark to me about criminal rivalry between the cause of the Cielo killings. Tex was a small fry. He bit off more than he could chew, talking on guys in suits running companies that made their real money with cocaine flown in from Mexico. In a 1977 article in the veteran counterculture publication, the Los Angeles Free Press, the Sanders quote above was cited with the intriguing afterthought. According to one private investigator, Joel Rostow had been working for the Drug Enforcement Agency. His associate was an executive of the multinational corporation involved in cocaine smuggling. One of the foundations of the helter-skelter myth is that Tex Watson was Manson's brainwashed disciple, incapable of acting on his own. It should be kept in mind, however, that Watson was by far the most independent of the loose-linked menagerie of misfits who came and went from the Spahn Ranch in '69. Other crimes he committed before August were of his own initiative and not part of the greater communal cause. From considering the disastrous consequences his blundering attempt to rob the mob could have led to, it isn't likely that he could have had at least mentioned the dangerous Rostow incident to an older and more experienced Manson. In 2008, I suggested to Manson that he must have surely had some knowledge of Watson's shootout with the syndicate pusher at Larrabee. He responded politely but firmly and with unusual formality. I was aware of a lot of earlier things that happened. This is Charlie talking. But I'm not obliged or required to discuss them at this time. It was as if he were on the stand and the phantom consigliere had whispered the correct legal clause into his ear. The iron no snitching gate had clanged shut again. The subject was dropped. After reading the 2011 edition, the Rostow robbery was not one of the topics Charlie volunteered to directly correct, deny, or expand upon. Other than his firmly disavowal of Bruce Davis's participation and admission that he had some local contacts in the Boiardo family, Boiardo, this silence on this subject compared to the detail he went into about other matters was glaring. So it's impossible to determine if Manson was informed about his occasional crime partners Watson's ill-advised adventures on April 13, 1969. But if he was, one thing was for certain. His own prior experience with the higher echelons of the underworld was extensive enough to know that it couldn't possibly augur well for him and his circle at Spahn Ranch. But Manson's murky history with major mob power brokers can be brought into the light. We must introduce Joel Rostow's ally and probable executioner into the ever-expanding cast standing in the shadows of Cielo Drive. But first, to add to your ever-mounting confusion of names and places, Let's first take a side trip to revisit an unjustly ignored but crucially landmark of this mystery's geography. That's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is called On the Horn of Dilemma. So we say thank you to all the vinyl community members. Steve is two followers away from 50. When he gets to 50, he'll give out that record.